Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of pine resin and cold stone filled the air. It clung to the ceremonial robes of the pack. 100 heartbeats held in a single, waiting breath. My own pulse was a frantic bird trapped beneath my ribs, beating against bone. I kept my eyes down, fixed on the weave of the simple linen dress I wore. To look up was to meet their stares. The pity, the scorn. The great hall was a cavern of judgment, its stone arches echoing a silence that felt heavier than any shout. Tonight, the moon would choose. Tonight, the Alpha King, Marius Dinar, would accept his fated mate. And the fates, in their cruel, blind wisdom, had whispered my name, Riona Hale, an Omega, unranked, unseen. Until now, a ripple of movement passed through the crowd, a collective inhale. He was here. I didn't need to see him to know. The temperature in the hall dropped, the very air growing thick, charged with the ozone of an impending storm. Power radiated from him in waves, a physical force that pressed down on my shoulders and made the hairs on my arms stand on end. He was not a man. He was a reckoning. His footsteps were silent on the stone, but I felt each one as a tremor in the floor, a vibration that traveled up my spine. He stopped before the high altar. Before me, I could smell him, not just the pine of the forest that clung to his cloak, but something deeper, something wild and ancient, the scent of winter frost, of dark earth, of a predator's clean, cold fury. It was the scent of a king who had knelt to no one. The elder stepped forward, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. King Marius, the moon is full. The bond calls. Do you accept the one the goddess has chosen? The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched and thinned until I thought it might snap, until I thought my own lungs would burst from the lack of air. I risked a glance upward, just a flicker of my lashes. He was staring, not at me, but over my head, at the stoic faces of the council. His profile was carved from granite, a harsh line of jaw and a straight, unforgiving nose. A faint scar, pale as a sliver of moonlight, cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes, they were the color of a frozen lake, holding depths no one dared to plumb, and they were filled with a chilling emptiness. Noi. The word was not spoken. It was forged. A single, hard piece of iron dropped into the silence, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Gasps rippled through the hall. A murmur rose, like the rustling of startled crows. My breath caught, a sharp, painful thing in my throat. The elder's face tightened. Alpha King? She is not worthy. His voice rolled over me, a wave of ice water. He still didn't look at me. It was worse that way. To be dismissed without even a glance. To be a problem solved, a piece moved off a board. I was nothing, a ghost at my own ceremony. An Omega cannot be Luna, he continued, his tone devoid of any emotion. This pack needs a queen of fire and strength, not this. He made a small, dismissive gesture in my direction, as if brushing away a fly. My hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The pain was a small, sharp anchor in a sea of humiliation. I focused on it, the bite of nail into skin, the warmth of the blood that followed. Anything to keep from falling apart right here, on the sacred stone, under the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. He finally turned his head. His gaze met mine. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The frozen lake of his eyes held me, and I saw something flicker in their depths. Something primal, a flash of darkness, a hungry, possessive light that had nothing to do with the cold king, and everything to do with the beast that wore his skin. His wolf. It saw me. It knew me. The connection was a physical shock, a jolt of lightning, that seared a path from my eyes to my very core. My own hidden, dormant wolf, a creature so weak it had never surfaced, stirred in its sleep, whining softly. Then, as quickly as it came, the flicker was gone. The ice returned, harder and colder than before. His lip curled in something that might have been disgust. He had felt it, too, and he hated it. He broke the gaze, turning to face the crowd. His voice boomed, leaving no room for argument. The fates were mistaken. I reject their choice. He raised a hand, and from the crowd, another figure emerged. Cassia, an alpha female from the high-born Dinar line, tall and proud, with hair the color of burnished copper and eyes that burned with ambition. She moved with the fluid grace of a hunter, her chin held high. She stopped beside him, a perfect picture of power and strength, a true alpha queen. She looked at me once, a fleeting glance of triumph, of pity so sharp it was its own kind of blade. Marius took her hand. I choose my own Luna. I choose strength. I choose Cassia. The pack erupted, not in celebration, but in a confused, hesitant roar that slowly built into acceptance. They were his, to command. His word was law. If he said the sky was green, they would believe it. If he said the fates were wrong, then they were wrong. He raised Cassia's hand to his lips, but his eyes, for one last, damning second, found mine again across the crowded hall. There was no victory in them, only a storm, a war fought and lost behind a mask of ice. That look broke me more than the rejection. I turned. I did not run. My bloodline was humble, my rank non-existent, but my mother had taught me dignity. I walked, one foot in front of the other, through the sea of bodies that parted for me as if I carried a plague. Their scents choked me, pity from some, satisfaction from others, the cloying perfume of Cassia's victory hanging over it all. I did not let the tears fall, not until the great oak doors of the hall closed behind me, shutting out the noise. Not until the cold night air hit my face, a slap of reality. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. It came out as a ragged, broken sob. The forest path was my only escape. The moon, the one who had supposedly chosen me, was my only witness. I walked until the sounds of the pack faded, until the only thing I could hear was the crunch of my own feet on fallen leaves and the frantic, useless beat of my own heart. I was a fool, a child who had believed in fate, in whispers from the goddess. I had let myself hope, just for a day, that I might be more than the quiet Omega girl who fetched herbs and mended clothes. The forest grew darker, the ancient trees swallowing the moonlight. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept over my skin. I stopped, leaning against the rough bark of a pine, and finally let my legs give way. I slid to the ground, the damp earth seeping through the thin fabric of my dress. The scent of him was still on me, in my hair, on my skin. A phantom touch of frost and power. I scrubbed at my arms, trying to erase it, but it was useless. It was branded into my memory. A twig snapped in the darkness behind me. I froze, my head snapping up. My senses, dull as they were, screamed, "Danger!" I listened, holding my breath. It was just an animal, I told myself. A deer, a fox. But the silence that followed was different. It was heavy, watchful. Another sound, a low growl. It was so deep it vibrated through the ground, through the soles of my feet, and up into my chest. It wasn't the sound of a normal wolf. It was the sound of something much larger, much older. I scrambled to my feet, my heart seizing in my chest. I backed away, my eyes straining to pierce the impenetrable dark beneath the trees. The growl came again, closer this time. It wasn't a threat. It was something else. A possessive, guttural rumble that spoke a language older than words. Then, I saw them. 2 points of light, glowing with an internal fire. Eyes the color of molten silver, burning in the shadows. They weren't the cold blue of the king. They were the burning, untamed eyes of the beast. The air shifted, and a scent washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. Pine, frost, dark earth, and pure, undiluted alpha. It was him, but it wasn't. This was not the cold, controlled king from the hall. This was the wolf he kept chained inside, and it had broken free. It took a step out of the shadows, and even in the dim light, I could see it was massive, its fur the color of night, its muscles cording with raw, unrestrained power. It looked at me, and in that gaze, there was no rejection. There was only hunger. There was only a terrifying, absolute certainty. The man had cast me aside, but his wolf had come to claim what was his. My mind screamed to run. My body was frozen, rooted to the damp earth by a fear so pure and absolute it felt like ice flooding my veins. This was not the king. This was the raw, untamed soul of the monarchy, the apex predator that had clawed its way to the throne through generations of blood and dominance. It moved. Not a sound, just a displacement of air, a ripple in the fabric of the night. One moment it was in the shadows, the next it was before me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. It was a furnace of contained power. I had to crane my neck to look up into its face, into those molten silver eyes. It lowered its head, the great ruff of fur on its neck brushing against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of terror through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the snap of jaws, the final, tearing pain. Instead, a wet nose pressed against the side of my neck. It inhaled, a long, slow, shuddering breath that seemed to pull the very soul from my body. It was learning me, my fear, my pathetic lineage, the faint, dormant scent of my own useless wolf. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound of profound satisfaction. It was a sound that said, mine, my own wolf, the timid creature I had never felt before, whimpered. It wanted to bow. It wanted to roll over and expose. Its throat. It recognized its sovereign. I tried to pull back, a tiny, pathetic movement of denial. The growl deepened instantly, a warning that vibrated through my bones. A heavy paw, each claw a curved dagger, settled on my shoulder, pinning me gently but immovably against the tree. It was not a gesture of aggression. It was a gesture of ownership. The great head moved, its snout tracing a path from my jaw to my collarbone. I could feel the huff of its breath on my skin, warm and carrying the scent of the wild. It smelled me as if I were the only thing in the entire forest, the only thing in the world. Then it stopped, its nose pressed against the delicate hollow where my neck met my shoulder. I could feel the vibration of its growl directly against my pulse point, the rhythm of my frantic heartbeat answering the deep thrum of its own. This was it, the end. But the teeth that grazed my skin were not meant to kill. They were sharp, a row of razors pressing with deliberate, terrifying control, a pressure, not a puncture, a claim. It was an ancient gesture, a wordless vow spoken in the language of instinct. The man had rejected the bond, but the beast would forge its own. A single, sharp tooth pricked my skin. A droplet of blood welled, and the wolf's tongue, rough as sand, lapped it away. A fire ignited at the touch, a searing heat that had nothing to do with pain. It was a brand, an invisible mark being burned into my soul. The world tilted, the edges of my vision turning gray. The sheer force of its presence, of its intent, was too much. My mind, my body, my weak omega nature, none of it could withstand the raw, undiluted power of a king's wolf making its claim. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me were those silver eyes, burning with a possessive fire that promised it would never, ever let me go. Marius awoke with a gasp, the taste of blood and damp earth in his mouth. He shot upright, the furs pooling around his waist, the air in his royal say. Chambers was cold, but sweat beaded on his brow. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, caged thing. A dream, no, a nightmare. He remembered the ceremony, the cold weight of the crown, the expectant faces of the pack. He remembered the Omega, Riona, her wide, wounded eyes. He remembered the relief, sharp and clean, of casting her aside, of choosing Cassia, of restoring order. After that, nothing, a black void, a gap in his memory that felt like a raw, gaping wound. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his head pounding. He ran a hand through his hair and his fingers came back damp with dew, tangled with bits of leaf. He looked down at his hands. Dirt was caked beneath his nails. A long, angry scratch ran down his forearm. A low growl of frustration escaped his lips. The beast had been out. He had lost control. He, who had spent his entire life mastering the feral instincts that had driven his father to madness, had lost time. Then he smelled it. He froze, his head snapping up, his nostrils flaring. The scent was everywhere. It clung to the furs on his bed, to the skin of his arms, to the air he was breathing. It was a ghost in the room, a perfume so intoxicating it made the wolf inside him stir and pace with restless satisfaction. Wild hyacinth and rain, her, the omega, panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He stood, stalking naked to the silver basin in the corner of the room. He stared at his reflection. The scar over his eye seemed darker, his face harsher. New marks littered his body, a series of deep, crescent-shaped scratches raked across his chest and shoulders. They looked like a woman's nails, dug in deep. He plunged his hands into the cold water, scrubbing at his skin as if he could wash her scent away. But it was useless. It was more than on him. It felt like it was in him, a stain on his soul. A sharp rap on the door broke the silence. "Your Majesty?" It was Torvin, his beta and closest advisor. "Enter," Marius snarled, wrapping a robe around his waist. Torvin stepped inside, his normally stoic face etched with concern. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. His gaze flickered around the room, his nostrils twitching, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "What is it?" Marius demanded, his voice a low threat. "My king, you smell." Torvin hesitated, choosing his words with care. "There is a scent in this room, on you." "I am aware," Marius bit out. The silence stretched. Torvin was loyal, but he was no fool. He could identify the scent of every member of the pack. He knew exactly who it belonged to. As if on cue, a furious presence announced itself at the door. It didn't wait for permission. Cassia swept into the room, her copper hair aflame against her pale skin, her eyes chips of green ice. She stopped dead, her beautiful face twisting into a mask of disbelief, then rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice shaking. She took a step, closer to the bed, her eyes fixed on the tangled furs. "Her scent is everywhere. It's all over you." "Cassia," Marius began, holding up a hand. "Don't you Cassia me," she spat. "You rejected her. You chose me, in front of everyone. And then what? You spend your first night crawling to her hovel like a whipped dog?" "I did no such thing," Marius growled, the beast in his chest, rising to meet her fury. The scent in the room thickened, his own ozone and frost mixing with the omegas, creating something new, something possessive. The wolf in him was pleased. The man was horrified. "Liar!" Cassia's scent flared, hot with rage and humiliation. "Do you take me for a fool? I can smell her on your skin. Explain this, Marius. Explain it now." He couldn't. He had no memory. He had nothing but the damning evidence of dirt, scratches, and a scent that was driving him to the edge of madness. To admit he'd lost control was to show a weakness he could not afford. Not now, not ever. "There is nothing to explain," he said, his voice dropping to a lethally cold calm. "I was in the forest, alone, her scent. It must have lingered from the ceremony. It was a weak lie, and they all knew it. The scent was not faint or old. It was fresh. It was the scent of skin on skin." Cassia let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "You are the king. You could have any woman you want. But her? The little wolfless omega you publicly shamed? That is your secret taste? You have humiliated me. You have humiliated us both." She turned on her heel and stormed from the room, leaving a trail of furious, heartbroken silence in her wake. Torvin looked at his king, his expression grim. "The council will hear of this. They will have questions." Marius stared at his reflection in the basin's water, at the feral stranger looking back at him. The man on the throne was at war with the beast in his blood, and last night, the beast had won. He had rejected her, body and soul, declared her unworthy, but his wolf had defied him. It had gone to her. It had touched her. He didn't know what it had done, but the evidence was undeniable. He had to find her. He had to know what happened in those lost hours. A cold, hard fury settled in his chest. This was her fault, her weakness, Her strange, alluring scent had somehow called to his wolf, bypassing his control. She was a danger, a weakness he had to cut out. He turned to Torvin, his eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter sky. "Find the Omega," he commanded. "Bring her to me, now." Deep in her small room at the edge of the Packlands, Riona jolted awake, a violent shiver racking her body. A burning sensation flared to life on her shoulder, a phantom echo of the brand she could not see. She didn't know how, but she knew. The king was awake, and the hunt had just begun. The hovel was cold. A thin, gray light filtered through the single grimy window, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air. I was curled on a pallet of straw and thin blankets, my body aching as if I'd been trampled. My dress was torn at the shoulder and stained with mud. Memory returned not in a flood, but in jagged, terrifying shards. Molten silver eyes, the weight of a paw on my shoulder, the hot, wet scrape of a tongue against my skin. My hand flew to my neck, to the place where its teeth had pressed. The skin was smooth, unbroken. There was no mark, no bite, nothing. Was it a dream? A nightmare born of humiliation and fear? But the scent was real. It wasn't just on my clothes or in my hair. It was in the air of my small room, a heavy, oppressive presence of frost and pine and pure alpha dominance. It clung to the rough wooden walls and the threadbare blanket. It had soaked into everything, branding my tiny space as his. He had been here. The thought sent a tremor of fear so profound it made my teeth chatter. Not just in the forest, here, in my room, while I was unconscious. What had he done? I scrambled off the pallet, my limbs stiff and clumsy. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I leaned against the wall to steady myself. My shoulder. It ached with a deep, throbbing heat. I pulled the torn fabric of my dress aside and looked. There, just above my collarbone, was the faintest trace of a mark. It wasn't a bite, not in the traditional sense. It looked more like a bruise, a faint, shadowy crescent that pulsed with a dull inner fire. It didn't hurt to the touch, but beneath the skin, something burned. A connection, a thread of energy that hummed with a life of its own. The man had refused the bond. The wolf had created one. I let the cloth fall, hiding the evidence from a world that would never understand. I was tainted, marked by a beast who acted against his master's will. What did that make me? Not his mate, not his chosen. Just a secret, a shame. A heavy tread of footsteps outside my door made me freeze. They were purposeful, military, not the shuffling gait of the other Omegas. The door flew open without a knock, slamming against the inside wall. 2 of the king's royal guard filled the doorway, their faces grim, their leather armor creaking. Their eyes swept over my pathetic room, then settled on me with cold disdain. "The king demands your presence," the first guard said, his voice flat and impersonal. My blood ran cold. He knew. Of course he knew. He woke up and smelled me on himself, and now he was coming to finish what he started, to erase the evidence, to erase me. I am not dressed," I stammered, clutching the front of my torn, dirty gown. "Now." The second guard grunted, taking a step inside. There was no arguing. There was no choice. I was an Omega. He was the king. My life was a fragile thing he could snuff out with a word. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and walked toward them. I would not let them see me tremble. I would not give them the satisfaction. They flanked me as they led me from the Omega quarters, their presence a clear signal to everyone we passed. Heads turned. Whispers followed us like a cloud of stinging insects. I saw Cassia standing with her circle of highborn friends, her arms crossed, a cruel, satisfied smirk on her face. She knew where I was going. She was probably the one who sent them. The walk to the king's citadel felt like a march to my own execution. With every step, the burning on my shoulder intensified, a frantic, humming beat that seemed to echo the pounding of my own heart. It was as if the mark knew it was getting closer to its creator. They didn't take me to the throne room. They led me down a dark, cold corridor to a heavy, iron-banded door. The guard opened it and shoved me inside, the door booming shut behind me, the lock clicking with a horrifying finality. It was a study, or a war room. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient leather-bound tomes. A massive wooden table dominated the center of the room, a map of the territories pinned to its surface, and he was there. King Marius stood by the fire, one hand braced on the stone mantle. He was dressed in simple black breeches and a linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and littered with pale, silvery scars. He had his back to me, but I felt his attention shift the second I entered the room. The air crackled, growing heavy and charged. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, staring into the flames. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the fire crackle. I could hear the frantic beat of my own pulse in my ears. The scent of him was overwhelming in the enclosed space, a clean, cold scent that made my lungs ache. "Tell me what happened," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the stones of the hearth itself. I swallowed, my throat dry. I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty. Do not lie to me." He turned, slowly, and his eyes pinned me to the spot. They were the color of a frozen lake again, hard and merciless. There was no trace of the molten silver of the wolf. This was the king, the man who had rejected me. "You reek of me, I reek of you. There are marks on my skin. There is a gap in my memory. You will fill it." I shook my head, my whole body starting to tremble. Nothing happened. I went to the forest after the ceremony. I fell. I must have hit my head. His lip curled into a sneer. He crossed the room in 3 long, silent strides, stopping just before me. He was a mountain of shadow and fury, blocking out the light from the fire. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. He inhaled deeply, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second. "Liar," he whispered, the word a puff of cold air against my cheek. "My wolf was with you. I can feel it. He left his scent all over you. A claim. Why?" The beast inside him was stirring. I could feel it, a low vibration in his chest, a flicker of heat in those icy eyes. It recognized me. It strained against the cage of the king's control, wanting to get closer. The mark on my shoulder burned, a searing, agonizing fire, a silent scream. It was calling to him, to the wolf. A gasp escaped my lips, and my hand flew to my shoulder to clutch the spot. His eyes narrowed, tracking the movement. Before I could react, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was like iron. With his other hand, he hooked his fingers into the torn collar of my dress and ripped it downward. The sound of tearing fabric was loud in the silent room. The ruined dress fell away, exposing my shoulder, exposing the faint, shadowy crescent mark to the firelight. He stared at it. The air left the room. His grip on my wrist tightened until I thought the bones would snap. His face, which had been a mask of cold fury, was now completely, terrifyingly blank. "What is this?" he breathed, his voice raw with disbelief. He reached out a finger, as if to touch it, but stopped, his hand hovering an inch from my skin. The energy between his fingertip and the mark was a visible, thrumming thing. The mark itself pulsed, a faint violet light glowing beneath the skin. The wolf was clawing at the bars of its cage. A low growl escaped the king's throat, a sound he seemed unable to control. "What did you do?" he snarled, his eyes flashing from the mark to my face. The ice was cracking, revealing the molten silver beneath. "What magic is this? Did you curse me? Did you force my wolf to this?" "No." The word was ripped from me, a desperate cry. "I did nothing. He did this. He found me in the forest. He held me down. I thought he was going to kill me." The king's face contorted, a war of emotions playing out across his harsh features. Rage, confusion, and something else, something that looked like horror. Horror at what his own beast was capable of. Horror at the undeniable proof of the connection he had tried so desperately to sever. "He branded you," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "A scent mark, the first stage of a claim." He released my wrist and took a step back, running a hand through his hair, his composure finally shattering. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked trapped. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice tight, strained. He was trying to convince himself. "It is a mistake, an animal's instinct overriding my will. It means nothing, but it meant everything. The mark on my skin was a tether, a chain that bound my fate to the beast. Even if the man despised me, I could feel him through it, not his thoughts, but his emotions. A chaotic storm of fury, denial, and a deep possessive undercurrent that belonged entirely to the wolf. "You will tell no one of this," he commanded, his kingly authority returning like a shield. "You will cover this mistake. You will go back to your hovel and you will not speak of what happened in the forest. Is that understood?" I just nodded, unable to speak, pulling the torn scraps of my dress back over my shoulder to hide the mark that burned like a secret coal. "Get out," he ordered, turning his back on me again, dismissing me as he had at the ceremony. I fled. I scrambled for the door, my hands fumbling with the heavy iron latch. As I pulled it open, I risked one last look back at him. He was standing perfectly still, his shoulders rigid. The only sign of the turmoil inside was his hand, clenched into a white-knuckled fist at his side. He was a king at war with his own soul. And I was the battlefield. As I stumbled back down the cold stone corridor, the whispers seemed louder, the stairs more pointed. I didn't care. All I could feel was the burning on my shoulder. "It meant nothing," he had said. But as I walked, I felt a faint, phantom echo through the mark. A deep, guttural rumble of pure, animalistic satisfaction. The man could lie all he wanted. The wolf knew the truth. Days bled into a gray, featureless haze. I became a ghost in my own life. The other Omegas, who had once offered quiet companionship, now averted their eyes when I entered a room. They left a wide, empty circle around me at the communal table. My presence was a sickness they were afraid to catch. The whispers followed me everywhere. The king's secret whore. She bewitched him. Use some kind of Omega magic. Cassia will tear her apart. I heard it all. I learned to build a wall of silence inside myself, a quiet place where their words couldn't reach. But the brand on my shoulder was a traitor. It pulsed with a low, constant heat, a secret humming beneath my skin that seemed to amplify every sidelong glance, every venomous murmur. It was more than just a mark. It was a conduit. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I would be jolted awake by a sudden wave of ice-cold fury that was not my own. During the day, a phantom, restlessness would settle in my bones, a desperate urge to run, to hunt, to break free. It was him. It was the storm raging inside the king, and his wolf was sending me the echoes. He was avoiding me. I never saw him, not even a glimpse from a distance, but I felt him. His anger was a constant, bitter taste on the back of my tongue. His turmoil was a pressure building in the air. The war inside him was escalating, and I was the cause. Tonight, my duties took me to the great laundry house behind the citadel. It was late, the moon a pale sliver in the sky. The air was thick with the smell of lye soap and damp linen. The fires banked low. I was alone, folding the last of the heavy wool blankets, my movements slow and rhythmic, my mind blessedly empty. The main door creaked open. I didn't look up, assuming it was another servant finishing their chores. "So this is where the little stray hides." The voice was like honey laced with poison. My blood turned to ice. "Cassia," I slowly raised, my head. She stood in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. 2 other high-born she-wolves flanked her, their arms crossed, identical sneers on their faces. They blocked the only exit. The room, which had felt spacious moments before, suddenly became a cage. Cassia's scent filled the space, hot, sharp, and aggressive. The smell of an alpha ready for a fight. "Working hard?" she purred, taking a slow step forward. "It's good to see you know your place. On your knees, serving your betters." I said nothing, my hands tightening on the wool blanket. My heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. "The king has been distracted lately," Cassia continued, circling me like a shark. "His scent is wrong. He's angry, volatile. He can't even stand to be in the same room as me, his chosen Luna." She stopped directly behind me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper in my ear. "And it's all because of the filth you've smeared on him." "I've done nothing," I said, my voice barely audible. "Liar." The word was a slap. "You smell of him." Faintly. "But I can smell it. You carry his mark, don't you? You let his beast brand you like common livestock." Her friends giggled, a cruel, sharp sound. "Let's see it," Cassia demanded. "Let's see the mark of the king's shame." I instinctively took a step back, clutching the blanket to my chest like a shield. "Leave me alone," Cassia laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "An Omega doesn't give orders. Not here." She nodded to her friends. "Hold her." They were on me in a second, strong. Alpha hands grabbed my arms, twisting them behind my back. They shoved me forward, my knees hitting the cold stone floor with a painful crack. The blanket fell away. One of them yanked my hair, forcing my head back, exposing my neck and shoulders. Terror, sharp and blinding, ripped through me. "Now," Cassia said, her voice filled with triumphant cruelty as she knelt in front of me. "Let's see what he finds so fascinating." Her fingers, cold as ice, reached for the collar of my tunic. She was going to expose the mark. She was going to touch it. The moment her skin made contact with mine, the world exploded in white-hot fire. The mark on my shoulder ignited. It wasn't a dull ache anymore. It was a searing, blinding agony, a brand being pressed into my soul all over again. A scream was torn from my throat, but it had no sound. It was a silent, desperate shriek that traveled along the invisible thread connecting me to him. "Alpha!" It was not my thought. It was the desperate, primal cry of my own dormant wolf, screaming for its mate, for its king. 1,000 miles away, in the king's war room, Marius slammed his fist on the great oak table, scattering maps and strategy markers. The wood groaned, cracking under the force of the blow. "Get out!" he roared at the council members, his voice inhuman, distorted by the growl that ripped through it. "All of you, out!" They scrambled for the door, their faces pale with shock and fear. The air in the room had dropped 20 degrees, frost tracing patterns on the window panes. His eyes were no longer blue. They were solid silver, burning with a light that was not his own. Pain. He felt a searing pain in his own shoulder, an echo of an agony that was not his. And beneath it, a wave of pure, undiluted terror. His Omega's terror. The wolf erupted. There was no fighting it, no containing it. It seized control of his body with a violence that left him breathless, a passenger in his own skin. It didn't bother with doors. It launched itself through the tall, arched window, shattering the ancient stained glass into 1,000 glittering shards. It hit the ground running, a four-legged shadow of death and fury. Its senses were a razor, cutting through the night. It ignored the sense of the council, the guards, the pack. It followed only one, Hyacinth and Rain, laced with the sour stench of fear. Back in the laundry, Cassia recoiled, her hand flying back as if she'd been burned. "What was that?" she hissed, staring at the spot she'd touched, where the skin now glowed with a faint, violet light. The ground began to vibrate, a low, deep thrumming that worked its way up through the stone floor, into my bones. A growl echoed from the darkness outside. It was not a sound. It was the end of the world. It was a promise of death so profound that the air itself seemed to go still, afraid to move. The two she-wolves holding me released me instantly, their alpha bravado evaporating into pure, animal fear. They scrambled backward, their eyes wide with terror, their own wolves whining in submission. Cassia froze, her face draining of all color. A massive black shape blotted out the doorway. It was too big to be a wolf. It was a creature from nightmare, its silver eyes glowing with a murderous fire. Its lips were pulled back, revealing teeth like sharpened daggers, a low, constant snarl vibrating from its chest. The king's wolf. It took one step into the room, and the temperature plummeted. Its gaze was not on me. It was locked on Cassia. It saw her not as his chosen Luna, not as a highborn alpha. It saw her as a threat to his mate. It lowered its head, the snarl deepening into a death rattle. This was it. He was going to kill her. He was going to tear out her throat in front of me. "Stop," I whispered, the word a faint puff of air. The great head turned. The silver inferno of its eyes met mine. The killing intent receded, replaced by a raw, overwhelming wave of possession, of concern. It took a step toward me, and then another. It stopped right in front of my pathetic, kneeling form. It nudged my hand with its wet nose, a silent question. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. tears finally tracking paths through the grime on my cheeks. It let out a soft huff of air, then turned its head back toward Cassia, who was still frozen in terror. A low growl rumbled in its chest again, a clear warning. Touch her again, and you die. Then, it did something that stunned me into silence. It bent its head and gently, so gently, gripped the collar of my torn tunic in its massive teeth. It began to pull me, urging me to my feet, leading me out of the room, away from the danger. He was rescuing me. He, the beast, not the man. As he led me into the cold night air, his growl softened into something else. A low, continuous rumble deep in his chest. It was the sound of a predator soothing its mate. A whisper of comfort, wrapped in the alpha's growl. He was taking me somewhere safe, and as we moved through the shadows, his massive form a shield between me and the world, I realized the terrifying truth. The king might hate me, but his wolf had just declared, in front of his chosen Luna, that I was under his protection. The war was no longer just inside him. It had just begun. The wolf led me not to my hovel, but through the winding, silent corridors of the citadel itself. His presence was a moving storm, a vortex of power that sent guards flattening themselves against the walls, their heads bowed, their eyes averted. None dared to question him. None dared to look at the Omega being led on a leash of torn fabric by the king's feral soul. He moved with a silent, fluid purpose, his massive paws making no sound on the cold stone. He was taking me to the one place in the entire Packlands where no one would dare follow, the king's chambers. He nudged the heavy oak door open with his head and pulled me inside, releasing my tunic only when the door had swung shut behind us. The room was a vast cavern of shadows and moonlight, dominated by a massive, fur-covered bed and a hearth where embers still glowed with a dull, red life. The scent of him was overwhelming here. Frost and pine. A clean, masculine scent that was the king's alone. But now, it was mingled with something else. The wild, untamed musk of the beast that stood before me, its silver eyes watching my every move. It nudged me again, this time toward the fire. A silent command. Get warm. Be safe. I sank to my knees on the thick bearskin rug before the hearth, my body trembling with the aftershocks of fear and adrenaline. The wolf lay down a few feet away, not taking its eyes off me. It didn't lie like a dog. It settled with the coiled, watchful stillness of a predator at rest, its head on its paws, a low rumble of possessive satisfaction vibrating in its chest. We stayed like that for a long time. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the crackle of the fire, the sound of my own unsteady breathing, and the deep, steady thrum of the beast's contentment. It was the most terrifying and the safest I had ever felt in my life. I stared into the flames, my mind a whirlwind. The man rejected me. The wolf saved me. The man saw me as a mistake. The wolf saw me as his. How could two halves of the same soul be so at war? Which one was the real king? The cold, controlled man who upheld the law, or the primal, instinct-driven beast who followed the law of the moon? As the first hints of dawn began to gray the windows, a tremor ran through the great wolf's body. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound of pain and resistance. Its form began to shimmer, the edges blurring like a heat haze. The air crackled with raw, untamed magic. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the stone of the hearth as I watched the transformation. It was not graceful. It was a brutal, violent battle. Bones cracked and reformed, muscles tore and reshaped. A strangled human groan of agony replaced the animalistic whine. Slowly, painfully, the man emerged from the beast. King Marius was left kneeling on the rug where the wolf had been, naked and gasping for air. Sweat slicked his skin. His powerful muscles corded with the strain of the shift. He pushed his hair back from his face, his chest heaving. For a long moment, he didn't seem to realize I was there. He was lost in the chaotic aftermath of the wolf's dominance. Then, his head lifted. His eyes, no longer molten silver but the frozen blue of a winter lake, found mine, and the peace shattered. Confusion warred with disbelief on his face, quickly consumed by a cold, familiar fury. He looked around the room, at his chambers, then at me, kneeling by his fire, and the pieces clicked into place with an audible snap. "You," he rasped, his voice raw. "What are you doing here?" You're Wolf," I stammered, pulling my torn tunic tighter around me. "He brought me here." Marius surged to his feet, snatching a robe from a nearby chair and wrapping it around his waist. He stalked toward me, his face a mask of thunder. "He did what? After he attacked my chosen Luna?" My heart stopped. "He didn't attack her. He saved me. She and her friends. They were hurting me." "Lies," he snarled, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Wolf's memories were a chaotic jumble, but the raw, protective emotions were undeniable. "You provoke him. Your scent, your weakness, it drives him mad. You are a poison in my veins." He stopped in front of me, looking down at me with utter contempt. But this time, it was different. He couldn't fully mask the war raging within him. I could see the wolf just beneath the surface, pacing, snarling, furious at the man's words, desperate to reclaim control. "This ends now," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This connection, this mistake, I will sever it." He reached for me, his hands grabbing my shoulders. His touch was not gentle. It was a brand of ice and fire. The mark on my shoulder pulsed violently, a screaming, desperate thing. "The council is demanding answers," he grated out, his fingers digging into my skin. "Cassia is demanding your head. My own wolf is defying my will. You have brought nothing but chaos." He was trying to hate me. He was forcing the emotion, using his anger as a shield against the pull of the bond, against the truth his wolf already knew. I could feel it through the mark, the frantic, desperate denial of the man fighting the unshakable certainty of the beast. And in that moment, I saw not a king, but a terrified man. A man so afraid of the power of the bond, of the weakness he perceived in me, in himself, that he would rather destroy it than accept it. "What are you going to do?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Kill me? Banish me? It won't break the mark. The wolf made it. Only he can unmake it." His eyes blazed. "Then I will chain him. I will lock the beast in a cage of iron, and will so deep he will never surface again. I will be king, not some mindless animal ruled by instinct." He was breathing hard, his face inches from mine. I could smell the scent of his skin, the clean frost of the man, and the dark earth of the wolf. It was a heady, intoxicating mix that made my head spin. My own, dormant wolf whimpered, recognizing its mate, even as the man tried to destroy everything between us. "He will never let you go," I said, the words coming from a place of certainty I didn't know I possessed. "And he will never let you have her." That was the truth he couldn't face. He could choose Cassia, mark her, crown her, but his wolf would never accept her as its mate. The beast had chosen me. Any bond with another would be a lie, a hollow mockery that would eventually drive him mad. His control snapped. A growl ripped from his throat, a sound that was half man, half beast. His eyes bled from blue to silver. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was fighting himself, and I was the battleground. He shoved me away from him, a desperate act of self-preservation. I stumbled backward, hitting the stone of the hearth. "Get out of my sight!" he roared, turning his back on me, his hands clenched into fists. "Go back to your hovel and pray I never have to see your face again. Pray my wolf never breaks free again." His words were a dismissal, but the truth vibrated in the air between us. This wasn't over. He couldn't cage the beast forever. The moon would grow full again. My scent would always call to him. The mark on my shoulder would always burn. I fled his room, my heart a shattered mess of fear and a strange aching pity for the king who was his own prisoner. I made it back to my empty room just as the sun crested the horizon. I collapsed onto my pallet, exhaustion washing over me. He had made his choice. He had chosen his crown over his soul. He had chosen his pride over his fated mate, the Alpha's broken promise. He would fight his wolf. He would deny the bond. He would stand with Cassia and pretend the mark on my skin didn't exist. But as I drifted into a restless sleep, I felt a faint, phantom echo through the bond, a whisper of pure, untamed will from the beast he was trying to cage. Mine. The war was far from over, and the next battle would not be fought with words. The cold came first, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. It seeped into the Omega quarters, a palpable wave of misery that stole the breath and quieted all chatter. It was the king's coldness, his iron will, suppressing the beast within, was a suffocating blanket thrown over the entire pack. He was true to his word. The wolf was gone. I no longer felt the echoes of its rage, its restlessness. The mark on my shoulder, once a burning coal, was now a dull, throbbing ache. The thread that connected us had been muted, stretched thin and taut, vibrating with the strain of the king's relentless suppression. The silence from him was a constant, screaming noise in my soul. Cassia was in her glory. She walked through the packlands with a renewed vicious arrogance, the perfect future Luna at the king's side. She never looked at me, but I felt the weight of her triumphant gaze. She had won. The man had triumphed over the beast. The proper order had been restored. But Marius was a hollow man. I saw him once, from a distance, standing on the citadel battlements. He was a statue carved from ice, his face gaunt, his eyes holding a bleak, haunted emptiness. He was winning his war, but he was dying in the process. A king without his wolf is a king without a soul. The breaking point came with the first snow of the season. Fat, wet flakes drifted from a bruised purple sky, blanketing the world in a pristine, muffling silence. The pack was ordered to the great hall for the winter solstice feast. Attendance was not optional. To refuse was to show disrespect, an act of defiance the king, in his current state, would not tolerate. Putting on the ceremonial dress felt like donning a shroud. Walking into the great hall felt like walking into my own tomb. The room was ablaze with candlelight and roaring fires, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and mulled wine. But beneath it all, the tension was a coiled serpent. He sat at the high table, Cassia beside him, a crown of holly on her copper hair. He looked regal. He looked powerful. He looked dead inside. He never once glanced my way, but I felt his awareness of me as a physical weight. The mark on my shoulder ached with a cold, desperate loneliness. The feast was a blur of noise and forced celebration. I sat at the lowest table, with the other Omegas, picking at my food, my head down. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A guard, his face pale and bloodied, stumbled into the hall, collapsing on the stone floor. "Rogues!" he gasped, his voice choked with blood. "They're through the northern perimeter. Dozens of them." Panic exploded. The hall, once filled with laughter, was now a cacophony of shouts and screams. The warriors of the pack, the alphas and betas, surged toward the doors, their chairs scraping, their growls echoing off the stone arches. Marius was on his feet in an instant, his face a mask of cold command. "To arms!" he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Protect the citadel, form a defensive line at the gate." But there was no fire in his voice, no primal roar of an alpha protecting his territory. It was the calculated order of a general, not the instinctual fury of a king. And the rogues knew it. They poured into the hall. They were gaunt, feral creatures, their eyes burning with a mad, hungry light. They were wolves who had lost their packs, their minds, their humanity. They fought not with strategy, but with a desperate, suicidal ferocity. Chaos was absolute. The smell of blood and fear choked the air. I scrambled under a table, my heart hammering against my ribs. The pack warriors fought bravely, but they were disorganized. Their alpha king, a hollow shell, who could offer them tactical commands, but not the unifying, instinctual power of a true alpha in his prime. Without his wolf, he could not inspire them. He could not lead the fight. A massive rogue, his fur, matted with blood and grime, tossed a pack warrior aside like a doll. His crazed eyes scanned the room and locked onto the high table. Onto Cassia. "A prize. The Luna," he charged. Marius moved to intercept him, drawing the ceremonial silver sword from his scabbard. He was a skilled fighter, his movements precise and deadly, but he fought like a man. He parried and lunged, but there was no weight behind his blows, no feral strength. The rogue, fueled by madness, simply absorbed the cuts, his claws swiping, forcing Marius back step by step. The rogue lunged, not at Marius, but past him, at Cassia. She screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. She was an alpha, but she was no warrior. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own robes. Marius roared in frustration and lunged to protect her, leaving his own flank exposed. Another rogue, seeing the opening, slammed into the king's side, sending him crashing to the floor. the sword flying from his grasp. He was down. The king was down. A collective gasp of horror went through the pack. The fight faltered. The morale broke. Without their unbreakable alpha, they were just a mob. The first rogue loomed over Cassia, its lips pulled back in a slavering snarl. Marius, pinned by the second rogue, could only watch, his face a mask of helpless fury, and the mark on my shoulder exploded into a supernova of agony. It was not his pain, it was his wolf's. The beast, chained and caged in the depths of his soul, was screaming. It was watching its territory being overrun, its pack being slaughtered, and another female not its mate being threatened. But the final, unbearable agony was seeing its human half, its king, brought low. The cage of Marius's will shattered. A howl of pure, soul-shattering power erupted from the king's fallen form. It was a sound of absolute dominance, of unrestrained fury, of a soul breaking free. The rogues pinning him were thrown back as if by a physical blast. The transformation was instantaneous, not a slow, painful shift, but an explosion of black fur and silver-eyed rage. The wolf that stood where the king had been was half again as large as before, a monster born of suppressed fury. It did not pause. It did not hesitate. It was on the rogue, threatening Cassia in a blur of motion, its jaws closing around the creature's neck with a sickening final crunch. It tossed the body aside and turned, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was a king reclaiming his throne. The pack warriors rallied, their own wolves answering the primal call of their alpha. They surged forward with renewed strength, a unified, unstoppable force. The tide of the battle turned in a heartbeat. But the king's wolf was not fighting for the pack. It was not fighting for Cassia. I felt its singular, burning focus through the mark. It was carving a path of bloody destruction through the chaos. A path to me. I was still huddled under the table. It found me, in seconds. It dispatched a rogue that had been sniffing nearby with a single, brutal swipe of its paw. Then it lowered its massive head, its silver eyes locking on mine. There was no thought, no hesitation. I crawled out from under the table and stood. The battle raged around us, a maelstrom of sound and violence, but in that moment, there was only the two of us. This was the choice: flee from the monster, flee from the king, or stand with the soul of the man I was fated to. I reached out a trembling hand and laid it on the thick, coarse fur of its neck. A shudder ran through its massive body. A low, guttural sound, almost a sob, vibrated in its chest. It leaned into my touch, its great head pressing against my stomach, a silent act of surrender. A plea. Stay. He was not a monster. He was a soul in agony, split in two, and I was the only one who could make him whole. "I'm here," I whispered, my fingers sinking deeper into his fur. "I'm not leaving." His head came up. His head, silver eyes burned with a fire that was no longer just rage. It was fierce, possessive, and filled with a desperate, profound love that stole my breath. He had made his choice by breaking free. Now, I made mine. I chose to stay. I chose the beast. I chose the king. I chose my mate. He turned, placing his body in front of mine, a living shield of black fur and righteous fury. He let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the hall, a declaration to the remaining rogues, to the pack, to the moon itself. She was his, and the king's war against his wolf was finally over. The king and his wolf were finally one. The air in the king's chambers no longer smelled of frost and solitude. It smelled of them. Wood smoke and winter pine, hyacinth and rain. It was the scent of a home, a sanctuary. Months had passed since the night of the rogue attack. The snow had long since melted, giving way to the tender green shoots of spring. From the great arched balcony, the world below was awakening, washed in the soft, pearlescent light of the coming dawn. Marius stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. His warmth was a solid, living thing against my back. His heartbeat, a slow, steady rhythm I could feel through my own body, was the only sound in the quiet of the morning. His thumb stroked the skin just above my collarbone, right over the mark. It no longer burned or ached. The faint, shadowy crescent was now a delicate tracery of silver, a permanent and painless part of me. It hummed with a quiet, constant contentment that was a perfect mirror of his own. "I can still feel the echo of it," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "The cage I built. The cold." I leaned back into him, covering his hand with my own. Through the bond, I felt not just his words, but the memory they carried. A raw, bleak landscape of loneliness and self-imposed fury. I felt his shame, his regret. It was a phantom chill that I soothed away with a wave of my own warmth, my own unwavering acceptance. "You were afraid," I whispered. It was not an accusation. It was a fact, an absolution. He let out a long, slow breath, terrified. I saw my father lose himself to the beast. I saw him destroy my mother with his rages. I spent my life believing the wolf was a curse to be contained. He pressed his lips to the mark, a soft, reverent touch. I never realized it was the other half of my soul. And you were its heart. He turned me in his arms, his hands framing my face. His eyes, once a frozen lake, were now the color of a clear morning sky, with flecks of pure silver that shimmered with the wolf's constant, loving presence. He was whole, the man and the beast, no longer at war, but in perfect, seamless balance. "Forgive me, Riona," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer fought to hide. "For the ceremony, for every cold word, every moment I denied what was right in front of me. There is nothing to forgive," I said. And it was the truth. The man rejected me. The wolf claimed me. And the king finally came home. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, breathtaking expression of peace that transformed his harsh features. It was a smile I had never thought I would see, and it was mine. The pack had healed. After the battle, Cassia had been given a choice: acknowledge me as Luna, or leave. Her pride had been too great to bow to an Omega. She had left with her followers the next day, her ambition a bitter poison she took with her. The pack, having witnessed the raw power of their united king, had accepted me with a quiet, growing reverence. They saw that my Omega nature was not a weakness. My empathy, my ability to feel the emotional pulse of the pack, was a strength their king now relied on. I was not the Luna of fire and strength he thought he needed. I was the Luna of heart and soul, the anchor that kept their formidable Alpha grounded. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine. We stood in silence, breathing the same air, our souls perfectly attuned. I could feel his love as a tangible force, a steady, protective warmth that erased all the old scars of humiliation and fear. He could feel my own love in return, a quiet, deep well of acceptance that had gentled the last of his demons. The first ray of sunlight broke over the distant mountains, spilling liquid gold across the valley. The silver light of the moon faded, giving way to the promise of a new day. Our day. He didn't need to speak the vow again. It was written in the mark on my skin, in the silver of his eyes, in the steady beat of our shared heart. The man, the wolf, the king, the Omega. And under the silver dawn, they were simply one.